severe economic correction, probably bursting of the debt bubble. That will affect government finances. That will in turn affect government's ability to pay welfare. Welfare will get slashed, and then we'll go nuts, and we won't accept government authority very much anymore. And then you get into a kind of feedback loop. The less authority government has, the less money it can raise through taxes. The less money it can raise, and the less welfare it can pay, and so the less authority it has with the public, etc., etc. So this is kind of scary. I can understand why people would like some advice on it. For what it's worth, I'd like to give that. What I'd like to do is to give, to start by giving my general advice and some underlying foundation ideas that don't always get, that don't get talked about but very much, actually, not in this context. Then what I'd like to talk about is some specific advice that I've gleaned from blogs over the years advising on how to prepare for economic breakdown, and then vulnerable groups. Who are the particularly vulnerable groups and what they can do. So I hope that this is going to be helpful. My advice, my aim is to give people advice as to how people can protect themselves. So if it's scary when I point out that this or that group is likely to be what we call vulnerable, that it's not meant to make people panic or trying to, I'm hoping people can at least take something away with that they can take away with them, that they can start to work with. And what's surprising in general is that the advice, it's not that materialistic. It's not about, the best advice is not about buying bunkers in New Zealand or filling them up with gold bars. It's not really about materialistic things very much at all. Primarily it's about what I believe I would boil it down into mental preparation. I think that's a big one. Being prepared for what's coming, not being panicked by it. And sort of the flexibility to say, okay, well, economies can break down, systems can break down, what do we do about it? Secondly, keeping a level head, avoiding panicking, avoiding having fights in the supermarket over toilet paper. Thirdly, situational awareness, particularly as regards crime, being able to look at, to analyse realistic threats. Those threats tend to be primarily crime, because crime balloons, it mushrooms if state authority recedes, and also things like how to stay out of trouble, and finally being able to decide what you're going to do, and then to do it, so not to be passive. Now, very little of this is the macho survivalist advice. I don't think that's all that useful. It tends to be a bit tedious, self-absorbed, a bit just a bit macho. A lot of prepping advice, I think, is like that. Fill up your garage with a load of bottled water and 3 years' supply of canned food. That's not to say I think it probably is a good idea to have more food. Perhaps just by filling up your cupboards a bit more, or putting some tins under the baseboards in your kitchen. So if you fill up your cupboards, if you have a month's worth of food enough, bad enough to keep you alive for a month in your cupboards, and you can rotate through it, then it doesn't go off. You're not really spending any more money because you'll be using more food. So I think that it's a good idea to do that. But try and avoid the macho prep. Well, the macho prep, he's likely to go out and spend $1,000 on a fancy prepper's watch that has God knows what functions on it, and then he'll go for a day trip to London wearing it, and he'll get stabbed to death because he's not that realistic. He's more into playing the role. Now, what is my advice? My main advice, my main specific advice, the specific thing that you can do to protect yourself in a situation like that, I think, is to find a legal system, law, that you can submit yourself to. So, not the legal protection of some gang lord, a warlord, or a theocrat, or a rogue colonel. They can't provide law very well. They can provide order through fear, but they can't provide the kind of law that keeps you safe among your neighbours, and that enables complex commerce to be carried out. That requires quite a fine legal touch, which gangster authorities don't have. What you're going to need is a good, transparent, detailed legal code. I've got one. It's very rough, very ready, and but it's enough to enable me to rent some custard-faced pederast of a judge in his horsehair wig and kick him in the arse to apply it, to make sure that the law can be applied. If things break down, I'm going to tout that around like a whore, because I think it will benefit people. I don't make a lot of money because there's no copyright in it, but I'm going to tout it around, and that's what you will need. Because if you're able to submit yourself to law and the protection of law, you are likely to be on the winning side, on the side that prevails, because you'll be able to live with people safely, and you'll be able to trade and make a living and be employed and have a bank account and a credit card, all those kinds of things. Something that I will say over and over is, if the state falls over and takes its corrupting fingers out of the pie, so long as you still have law standing, the economy will get up again faster than you can starve. So that kills a lot of your worries. Okay. Also, I think that there is general advice that I would give for a situation of collapse, sort of foundational advice. And there are three things that I would advise. And these are things that I think are useful for the stressful circumstances that you find yourself in if society breaks down. And they're quite unlikely things. I think the first thing is to maintain good relations with your neighbours. Try and forego the urge to have a dispute with the people who live immediately next door to you. I don't know if that's an English thing, but often neighbours get on quite well, except the people who live next door to each other. Try and get over that urge to quarrel with your immediate neighbours. Your neighbours are the people who will help you. They're the people who will be able to discuss ideas with you about protecting the neighbourhood. They're the ones who will help you to protect your neighbourhood, the people you can club together with. They're the people you can go to for help. Don't head for the hills. You're going to need access to services like medicine and other people to defend you. So make nice with your neighbours. I make nice with my neighbours. I eat chickens. When I've got an overflow of eggs, I give away those eggs to my neighbours, and they like them because they're nice, free-range eggs. And that's okay. You don't have to go that far. You can be more direct, actually. Things are getting so bad that if you probably knocked on every door in your neighbourhood and said, I'm getting up an emergency WhatsApp group in case things all go belly up, in case things turn to sewage, then I think only a small number of your neighbours will think you are nuts. A lot of them will think, yeah, that might be quite wise. And then if you do that, you might be at the front of the queue when things go belly up. Just a simple emergency WhatsApp group or a Facebook group. So try and cultivate good relationships with your neighbours, and make them good enough that you can discuss these issues with them, and not in the tough guy macho way. The second thing that I think is necessary or advisable is to try and cultivate close, loving relationships with the people immediately around you, your husband or wife, your children, your immediate family, because that will have, I think, that will have a stabilising effect on your mind, on your emotions. It creates motivation, the ability to thrash things out with someone close to you, and a kind of teamwork, a shared motivation, but primarily that stabilising potential. That's really valuable in a situation like that. I would define, if you, as I do, if you define love as the wish to give happiness or take away misery, to give happiness to or take away misery from another, you can see how that works, why that would matter. So if you've got a bad relationship with your spouse, try and repair it, or else maybe just dissolve it early. But and you're better working on that now whilst this time. Try and sort that out before before there is some kind of collapse. The third thing I think is more speculative, I think is very valuable, it'll seem strange, and that is to try and cultivate some kind of philosophical, psycho-spiritual or religious discipline that you can stick to, or something, and I think some philosophical discipline that's near a religion because in its rigour, and try and practice that as a discipline. And I would say something that emphasises love or compassion and realism. And those two together, I think, can be a very effective combination. So compassion and love and realism. Clear realism, not cynicism, just a clear-eyed understanding of the way things are. Christianity, I think, is a pretty good religion. That's very good on love and compassion. It hasn't been so good on realism. My own religion is Buddhism. That's pretty good on compassion and realism, but it's riddled with charlatanism, so you need to be careful there. I'm not here to evangelise for any particular religion. I would steer clear of Islam. That's a moral and ethical inversion. Don't get involved in that. But if you can establish some kind of religious discipline and self-discipline that you practice regularly, I think you'll find it has a stabilising effect on your judgment, emotions and ethics. And ethics are really good. They provide a strong foundation which can keep you stable despite, even if your environment is swaying to and fro, as it does when there's a kind of collapse. So those are three sort of underlying foundational things that I think I'll have to explain why they're important as I go on to what other bloggers have said. Now, what have other bloggers said? Well, I've read quite a lot of blogs over the last, 15, 20 years, and I think probably, I can't go through all of them, a lot of them are really tedious, a lot of them, they tend to go for clicks, they tend to go for headlines saying everything's going to collapse tomorrow. I think Zero Hedge, it's not a prepper's website, it's an economic website, but that certainly always used to say that everything's going to collapse by next Tuesday. I think probably the best blog that I read is you can get a lot of information from is this one here. I'll just bring it up. Now it's called Surviving in Argentina. It's by a fellow called Fairfell, F-E-R-F-A-L, Fairfell Blogspot, and his line was that he is from Argentina. He lived through a string of economic and financial collapses in Argentina, where the government would collapse, and so he knew all about it. And then I think he came to Spain, eventually settled in Northern Ireland, and he said, I've learned it all in Argentina, you're going to collapse here, and I can give you advice about it. And he's got this little blog here, and I think it gives a lot of good advice. And I can't go through all of it, but I can mention one or two posts that summarise what he's saying. The first one, I think, which is pretty good, is this one here, what kills you after an economic collapse, if you can see that. It's not a particularly long article, but I'll try. I'm not going to read the whole thing, it'll take too long, but what I'll do is I'll summarise what he says. The first thing he talks about is adaptability. He says that's critical. Adapting, accepting that life has changed, and letting go of the pre-collapse expectations, because if you can do that, that will prevent despair and inaction. The analogy that I would draw is that in disaster situations, you might get a plane catches fire on the runway and fills up with smoke that kills everyone on the plane, or a ferry sinks in the harbour, and hold on, bear with me, let me get rid of this whilst I'm talking. A ferry sinks in the harbour, and what you often find in those situations is half the people who die are still sitting in their allotted assigned seats, some of them with the seatbelts still attached, just inhaling in all the black smoke and just going to the bottom of the harbour and drowning, because people can't adjust to the immediate new reality. There's a problem here, there's a disaster here, you've got to get up and get out somehow. And what we have particularly, I think, at the moment is a sense of irrational impermanence. I hear it time and again people saying, no, the state can never collapse, the state authority will never collapse, it just won't do it. I can't, and when I ask why, they say, well, I can't see it, I just can't see it going away. And if you think that state of mind is bad, then you should listen to the response I get when I say that the welfare state is going to break down. That is in general met with paralysed radio silence or else anger. How can you say that? You can't say that pensions won't collapse, the welfare state won't collapse. You're a fascist to say that. And that is foolish and self-destructive. And that doesn't mean that the welfare state won't collapse. It simply means that when it does, you're just going to panic all the more. You're going to make more demands, and that ends up in public anger, and that ends up in bloodshed in situations like that, situations of collapse. So the first thing that Fairfield fella says in his article is to be adaptable, to adapt to the new situation. The second one is stress management. Be able to manage your levels of stress, because economic collapse will amplify them. You might get health issues, you might get I think a point that he makes is that if you have a problem, economic collapse will make it worse. If you've got a health issue, if you've got an anxiety issue, a depression issue, if you've got a bad marriage, if you've got a gambling problem or a drink or drug problem, the stress of collapse will make those problems worse. So find a way, cultivate ways to be able to manage that stress. Give up the substance abuse if you can. Try to take some exercise 2 or 3 times a week. Try and become mentally resilient. I would say, again, that is the value of some kind of religious discipline. I think one of the main motivating factors for religion or Christianity is fear of economic insecurity, or the fear of social insecurity. And similarly, I think maintaining close loving relationships with the people around you, I think that is likely to have a good effect on a mentally stabilizing effect, and that will reduce stress. So it's a little bit like, we are like zoo animals. We're so mollycoddled and catered to by the state. If the state goes away, we're like zoo animals who are suddenly kicked out into the jungle. We need to develop resilience for that. Now, the third thing that Fairfield fella says in his blog is to be realistic. To be realistic about what the threats are, what the likely risks are, and they're probably going to be crime and financial instability, not the sensationalized fears like riots and total societal collapse. Don't think Mad Max. It won't be like that. It's more likely to be more mundane things like brownouts of the electricity, learning to drive without stopping at the traffic lights, finding a way to commute to work if your job still exists without going through foreign enclaves, because they'll probably jump on your car and drag you out of it. And finally, the fourth thing that Fairfield fella advocates is taking action over excuses. And his attitude tends to be, where there's a will, there's a way. I take that with a pinch of salt, but I think what he's saying is he says prepare for action. Don't be too embarrassed to take action when things start going wrong, because usually the people who take action are the people who get off the sinking ferry, or who get off the airplane that's filling up with smoke sitting on the runway. And I think for that, again, having good, close, loving relationships with the people around you, that is a good idea, because you can discuss these things without fear of being embarrassed, and then quickly come to the conclusion, we've got to do something about this. Also, good neighbour relations will encourage that kind of discussion as to what you should do, what you can do. Now, okay, so that's what I just showed up. That fella there, Fairfield, Surviving in Argentina, says about what kills you after an economic collapse. I'll come back to him again in a minute. But what I want to deal with first is, what I want to go into now is how this applies to vulnerable groups. Now, the first vulnerable group, I would say, is poor people. I think poor people have been made poorer by the credit boom that we've had over the last, for about 30 years, certainly since the beginning of the Blair years. By credit boom, I mean central banks making money readily available and lending it and keeping interest rates as low as they can. What that does is it enriches the people who are already rich, because they're the people who have assets they can use as security. They get their hands on the money first, and then before people realise that the amount of money has been increased, and the value of money therefore diluted, and they invest it into assets, and you get an asset price boom. Your wages don't go up, but capital assets do. Things like the cost of education, the cost of healthcare, housing and rent, those capital items go up, which is what a lot of people have experienced. Pay not going up, but rent going through the roof, house prices going through the roof. Poor people are rendered poorer by that, and have been. And in return, people become more and more reliant on the state, and we become more and more conditioned to rely upon the state. So that if the state goes away, you get a lot of ordinary, very cash-strapped people suddenly are being very, very vulnerable. And again, I think you can see what I would advocate there is probably one of the best things you can do if you're hard up is to cultivate close, loving relationships if you can, and to cultivate good relationships with your neighbours, and just talk about them. Talk to them about what is coming and what you can do about it. Things are getting so bad that they're not going to think you're a nut for doing it. But what can you do to make money when the state and the welfare state have gone? Well, what this is, if I go to another article that this Fairfax fella came up with, it is here, that article, Making Money During the Crisis. He goes through 5 business ideas. I don't know if you can read this, but the first one he says is, if public schools go, he says, well, set yourself up as a teacher. Set up a little private village school where people bring in, I don't know, each pupil brings in 10 quid a day, or 20 quid, whatever you're going to charge. Or set up a security operation, or set up a health organisation where you might, maybe, if you're a doctor or if you're a nurse, you might just set up a health clinic. The fourth one is number 4. He deals with health companies as well. I think probably that would mean maybe some kind of health insurance, then he says, well, you can, if petrol prices go up, you can set up a transport operation yourself. So his basic advice, let me just switch that off. His basic advice, the summary of his advice, is to diversify and adapt into things that make money after a crisis. So security is something that people need, because when the state goes away and the police goes away, when the police go away, crime mushrooms, and people need security. So you might paint a little jam sandwich stripe around your car, and put a couple of dash cams on your car, and do patrols around the neighbourhood each night, and get paid to do that. And that's one way you can impose security. And criminals do not like being on camera. And if the state goes away, they can be quite worried about it, because they don't know what's going to happen to them if we're in an organised neighbourhood. Or you might organise transport. People might be worried about driving to work because they don't know if they're going to get carjacked. Well, you could organise some kind of minibus service with someone on board who's carrying a weapon, and that people will pay for that. I would in a situation like that. The other general advice he gives is to try and build on your existing skills. So if you're a nurse, you could set up a little health clinic. Or let's say you work for a local authority, and your local authority job is gone, you might find that actually you've got plenty of education, you've had the spare time to educate yourself. You could set up a little school, because you know how to teach children. You have the ability to teach children to read, write and add up. And also finally talks about being pragmatic. Avoid an isolated retreat, don't head for the hills, be self-reliant without isolation. So that's general advice that he gives, that Fairfax fellow gives here in that blog post, Making Money During a Crisis. The good news is you might not have to survive for that long, because once the state gets its contaminating fingers out of the pie, the economy recovers very fast, as I say, faster than you can starve. Now, the next vulnerable group, I think, is old people. And old people are vulnerable because, in fact, it's not all boomer cruises for old people. The bulk of people living on a pension are working class people, and that's all they've got, their state pension. That is not easy. Most old people are poor. They haven't ridden the asset boom. The ones who have had money to ride the asset boom, those people might find themselves high and dry if you get a house price crash, if their private pensions just disappear, if state pensions go. I think people who thought they were really set for the rest of their lives and really wealthy could find themselves with nothing. I think that might be a problem, because a lot of older people have been really good at using political pressure on government to get triple lock on the pension and various other benefits, because older people tend to vote more. Tony Blair called retirees Rottweilers on speed. They were so good at pressurising government. And I think older people probably have applied excessive, improper pressure on the state. That if the state goes away, that reverses itself, because when voting goes away, older people have very little power, because older people can't riot. And I think that could be a particular problem, because if you have the hostility that I think has developed from younger generations who can't go on the boomer cruises and can't get on the property ladder because the asset boom has priced them out. The asset boom that older people have ridden has priced out younger generations. I can see there being precious little sympathy for older people. Quite unfair, given that most older people are really, working class older people are really very poor. So some of the poorest people are just eking it out on a state pension. What can you do? Older people, I think, the best thing, again, cultivate close relationships, loving relationships with people immediately around you, immediate family, children, grandchildren, or your spouse. Try and get good relations with your neighbours. And another thing you can find is, if you're older, people won't give you a job, but they'll jump to buy something from you because they'll tend to trust you. So you could be the wise old geezer who goes around and sets up the neighbourhood alert team, and or does something to organise the security patrol, again putting you at the front of the queue if there are problems, and also making you popular with your neighbours. That you could do that. You don't just have to sit back and be passive. So I think there is some hope there for more than you might think for older people. Now, the fun part, women. Now, I'm probably going to alienate half of my already very select audience, but anyway, I think women are going to be vulnerable if there is an economic breakdown or a government breakdown, because I think women's earning power is a lot smaller than is made out. I don't think it's nearly so high as government and media might lead women to believe, and that women have certainly been very happy to believe. And so firstly because of that, because of the smallness of women's overall economic contribution, and secondly because of really the advanced problem of lovelessness amongst women, female lovelessness. I think that is a problem, because if those two taken together mean that women are economically vulnerable, and then if they can't form close bonds, loyal bonds with men, that is a problem. So if I take those two in turn, on the economic side, I think a lot of women's interests have been bankrolled and underwritten and insured by governments, successive governments, implementing feminist policy out of ideology, but also as a way to stuff women into the workplace in order to reduce wages, so that companies can get more profitable and the stock market can appear to be rising. And in the same way that governments encourage mass immigration in order to dilute wages and impoverish you, I think feminism has played a similar role. And those protections, that they include things like equal value, equal pay laws, and equal value laws, equal pay laws are a good illustration. They're not there to protect women from discrimination. They're there to protect women from the laws of supply and demand. And any group that needs protection from the laws of supply and demand isn't very good at supplying what there is a demand for. And I think that is illustrative of, in fact, women's significantly lower earning power once the state and the central bank is stripped away. Because I'll give you an example of this. If you look at the problems in Birmingham, if I go to this news story there. So that's bankrupt Birmingham, why the council went bust. That picture will come up in a minute. A deal that would have settled Birmingham's huge equal pay claims without bankrupting the council fell apart after trade unions found members were still suffering discrimination. What that means is it's equal value. So doing a different job, but saying it requires the same skill, the jobs that men are doing. And that for Birmingham was £750,000. So you can see why Birmingham got bankrupted. But the problem is there are lots of jobs that women don't want to do. So dirty jobs that mean you're outside in all weathers, jobs that mean you have to travel away from home a lot, jobs where you have to do really long hours, dangerous jobs like deep sea fishing, slinging cables, being a lineman, slinging electricity cables, being a sewage engineer, a ditch digger. There are all these jobs, or painting gasworks. These are jobs that are farming that women tend not to want to do, and so women will cluster around certain softer jobs, and that means there's an oversupply of women for those jobs. So supply and demand means their wages are going to be lower, and that was the case within Birmingham. Those women weren't forced to go to those jobs. They negotiated the wages and took them on voluntarily. It was simply found that supply and demand is operating against them, so the law intervened to give them more money, and that has bankrupted Birmingham Council. Now there'll be fewer jobs for everyone, including women. It's stupid, but that is the nature of pro-feminist legislation. And if you get the government breaking down, that kind of legislation disappears overnight. It's gone. It doesn't get enforced. And what also disappears is government jobs, because government goes away, working for the government ceases to be paid. Those government jobs go away. Also, more subtly, what tends to happen is jobs that depend on the credit boom, those jobs tend to go away, and those tend to provide the softer, indoor, safer, stationary jobs in one place, reasonably close to home, that women are comfortable taking. And those jobs that women will take on, which are promoted by the credit boom, tend to be jobs like jobs in finance, jobs in speculative areas of the economy. Those are particularly women-friendly because it's not about creating value now, it's about telling a story about future profitability in order to attract speculative investment now. So tech companies, tech bubble companies, they do well under a credit boom. They will go away once government goes away, because once government goes away, central banks go away. Once central banks go away, you cease to get the credit boom. But by the credit boom, I mean central banks making money available for businesses to borrow, banks and businesses to borrow at low rates of interest. And also something else that the credit boom encourages is high levels of consumption. And the way that works is, if the interest rate is lower than inflation, it is cheaper for you to borrow the money to buy something now, and then you can enjoy it from today, than it is to forego the pleasure for a year to save up and then buy it in a year's time. Because in a year's time, the price will have gone up. The price will have gone up more than the interest you pay if you borrow the money to buy it now. And that, when you have low interest rates, that it inculcates habits of consumption. You can see this with food. There's low-grade food everywhere, high consumption, low-grade food everywhere. With music as well, it's difficult to escape music in a public place, and that music is all bad. And that's what happens under a credit boom. You get those habits of low-grade but frequent high-volume consumption. And jobs that deal purely in consumption, just slinging goods, Those are jobs that women are. Those tend to be softer jobs. They're easy. They're not the dirty, hard struggle to create value. They're about putting goods on the conveyor belt. And those tend to be high consumption jobs, tend to be women-friendly jobs. And those jobs go when the state collapses. If I give you an example of this, there's a video that Paul Joseph Watson did recently. I'll just see if I can bring it up, or bring up a picture of it now. Well, I'm not going to play it, but that's the problem with women. You can look it up on his website. It is quite funny. He's basically dealing with female employment, which is being called he calls daycare for women, or adult daycare for women. And in that video, what you see is nearly all the jobs, or the non-jobs that get referred to in that video, where you're getting sort of children's playrooms for adults to go and play in, and free wine on tap, endless coffee and free food. Those jobs, they're either in finance or they're in speculative tech, so Google, Twitter, Meta, or they're in high consumption areas of employment. And when the credit boom goes away, so do those jobs. And the women-friendly jobs tend to go away. The women-friendly jobs, I think, are artificially boosted by the credit boom. And hold on, bear with me a second. Now, you might all have seen this Gen Z boss in a Mini. That's another example of it. Let me just play a very short clip of that because it's so toe-curling.
Gen Z boss in a Mini! Gen Z boss in a Mini! Itty-bitty cheese and a ball! Itty-bitty cheese and a ball! 5'3" and attitude!
Okay, that's enough of that. My point is, whenever you see these sort of strange non-jobs, these jobs where everyone stands around making TikTok videos, these non-jobs that women do, they're always jobs that are either for the state or boosted by the state via the credit boom. And I think this is no exception. So this company, where these women are making their silly TikTok video, and they did a follow-up as well. From this website, TrackXN, I think it tracks companies. It's about this, they're called TBH, I suppose, to be honest, skincare. They've raised £450,000 in funding. It's a startup. That is speculation. That is a speculative investment. Whoever's investing thinks, these girls have got something together, they've got a buzz, they're going to go places, they're the ones who are going to make money in the long term. That's what happens with the credit boom, because low interest rates favour investing large amounts of money over the long term, because when the interest rate is low, that really tells over a long period, year after year after year, paying low interest makes it worthwhile, whereas it wouldn't do if the currency collapsed and you returned to gold and there was a natural, organic interest rate set. So I think I'm not trying to knock a skincare business. What I'm saying, I am a little bit. But what I'm saying here is this. I think this is a speculative business as a result of credit boom, and also the company has 184 active competitors, including 8 funded and 2 that have exited. I have the impression that might be 184 in Australia, because those ones that I mentioned there, Frank Body Go-To and Ultraviolet, those seem to be Australian companies. So I don't think that Australia needs access to 184 skincare companies. I think that's because of habits of consumption. So it's not just about speculation, it's about consumption. This is the high consumption economy as well. And I think that has led these jobs, the jobs that these ladies here are enjoying and messing around in, those jobs are created by the credit boom. When the state goes away, the credit boom goes away, those jobs will go away. They won't be able to find 450 grand for a skincare company, and a lot of those, and people will suddenly find, I don't need to buy yet another brand of skincare products. That high consumption ethic passes very quickly once you return to a gold standard.
I have been with my husband for almost 20 years.
I don't want to play that. You see the same thing with this lady here. She got herself quite famous. I think 12.5 million views on TikTok, 1.3 million likes as well. Very popular lady. if you've got a strong stomach, it is amusing to watch her. She has a horrible voice. She's a bully. She's humiliating her husband in public, saying that she nearly divorced him because he failed to empty the trash one morning because he was rushing to get to work. His job is a job that creates value. He's a linesman, outdoors, in all weathers, doing something dangerous, something that's physically hard and creates value. Her job is as a mental load consultant. So, again, my point is, wherever you look at these strange jobs people are doing, they are jobs that are there because of, I think, because of the credit boom and habits of speculation and consumption that the credit boom gives rise to. Now, if you look at let me just bring it. If you look at what she's doing, her website, that lady's website, there's a free mental load guide. She helps women to deal with mental load. If she's saying that she nearly divorced her husband of nearly 20 years because he failed to empty the bin, that doesn't sound like she's the right person to advise you on mental load. What I'm saying is, I don't think that job creates any value. If anything, it seems to me, it's destructive towards value by encouraging women to say, I'm not going to put up with this mental load anymore. And you can buy her audio course, and the audio course is $175. How to talk to your partner about mental load. I would give more than $175 not to have someone like that talk to me about mental load. I'm not married to that lady. Listening to her talk makes me want a divorce. So, but the point I'm making is that her hold on, let me just bring that up. Is that what she's offering, that is about high consumption. That's a high consumption job. She stays at home, nice soft job, not having to travel far, not doing anything out in all weathers, not doing anything dangerous. That is, again, another example of the jobs that women go for and are encouraged by credit boom. Those jobs will go away if you get a societal and economic and civil breakdown, civil collapse. Yet again, you keep on again. Credit boom creates soft jobs that women are happy with. Credit boom goes away, those jobs go away. I think women are not the earners that women have been told they are and have been only too happy to believe they are in general. The argument that's used against that is, look at universities, look at women in college, they're doing really well, they're outnumbering men in college. But college again, modern, going to university today, that is not about production, particularly with the subjects that women tend to favour a bit more than men. Those subjects of going to university is about consumption. It is not about production. I don't think it is a productive activity today in general. It is about consumption, going and having a good time. To the extent that there's education, it's about just enriching your mind because you want to. That is not about production. So I think that argument, that doesn't cut much ice. That doesn't show that women are more economically productive. Okay, my point here, what I'm trying to do to drive home the message is not to castigate women, but to say why I think women are going to be surprisingly vulnerable. And I think women need to come to terms with that and prepare for it. Because if you're not prepared for it, that can hit hard. Now, the other thing I talked about is what I think is modern habits of female lovelessness, which I think arises out of feminism being bankrolled, underwritten and insured by government. And if I take the definition of feminism as being me, what I should get, if I like, I want, I should have, men give me, men, if I don't get, it's men's fault, give me, I want. That generally is, I've summarised feminism to you now. There's a whole load of loony, incomprehensible feminist literature, but when you sweep that aside, that's what you're left with. It's about, I want happiness for me, I want you to give me happiness. If you define love as the wish to give happiness to another, then you can see that those flow in the same directions. Those are antithetical. They are quite hostile to each other. And you might be able to say, well, you can have them in theory, and maybe this or that aspect of feminism is supposed to be ethical, but in reality it's like a river flowing in two directions. You don't see it. It generally doesn't happen. And so what I think has happened is that the feminist message has been swallowed whole by most women, so that women might not call themselves feminists, but they've swallowed the doctrine, so that even anti-feminists argue against feminism from a feminist perspective. That is damaging. I think it's going out of fashion now, and not just feminism going out of fashion. I think women are going out of fashion. You ladies, I think you're going out of fashion. And maybe as simple as that, no more than the width of trouser leg, but I suspect you brung it on yourselves a bit, and you're now going to have to eat what you ordered. And I want to provide some evidence of what I'm saying, because what I'm saying is provocative. Now, this is an index of female lovelessness. This is a study from OkCupid, this dating website. Women say 80% of men are below average. So 80% of men are below average. And this has been reported. You can just Google for that headline. You get a number of articles. I'll just read the first line. A study by dating app OkCupid found that women find 80% of men unattractive or below average. That is not women having high standards. That is not women being choosy. That is women being loveless, just dismissing most men out of hand, and at best seeing men as infatuation delivery vehicles. So a selfish attitude towards men, and the data is quite startling. This is another index on female lovelessness. Rules of attraction, modern female lovelessness. Rules of attraction, female perception of male self-representation in a dating app, i.e. how women rate men. So that was by the Asian Marketing Journal. I think it was done at an Asian university. So it's not directly applicable, but I think a lot of these habits are quite global. I'm not going to go through the fine print of all this study. I'll just show you a summary of what it said here. This is on ResearchGate. The money quote that everyone took away from this is that while only one, it says prol, that means profile, out of 100 was liked by more than 80%. So only 1% of men were liked by more than 80% of women, i.e. 22 out of 27 women of the participants. 38, says profiles, 38 profiles were disliked by the same 80%. Whichever way you look at that data, that is astonishing data. Only 1% were liked by 80% of women, and 38% were disliked by those 80% of women. That is not high standards. That is not being choosy, picky. That is being loveless, just rejecting men out of hand. This is another little index of female lovelessness. This is from Tinder now, so it's a different study. Male subjects liked 61.9% of female profiles. So men want someone, they want you to be reasonably nice, someone really sweet, and someone they can get on with and maybe love and possibly put on a little pedestal. And female subjects liked only 4.5%. So that's 4.5 times better than the Asian Institute of Marketing Journal study. 4.5% of males. Findings in line with evolutionary psychology, etc. Well, I wonder how far. That is a long way from the days when it was said there was someone for everyone. It's a long way from what must seem like an obscenity today, which is the marriage vows for sickness and health, richer for poorer, better for worse, etc. And you can see this in... why is that? Well, I think this is another index of modern female lovelessness. Incidentally, I don't think it's always been this way. If you look at Shakespeare's women, he portrays these beautiful, consistently wise, loving, witty, and emotionally very stable people, much more stable than the men, with very fine qualities. And so I doubt that was based on nothing. But this is, I think, a modern habit of lovelessness that has been instilled by feminism. That must be the explanation, I think. Now this one, that graph there, that shows how that's height from 7 foot going down to that 6 foot, that's 5'11", that's 5'10", etc., going down, down and down and down. And just to summarise it, almost 60% of women on Bumble, these are filters that women put on their profiles, where a woman says, I don't want you to show me the profile of any man below this height. So almost 60% of women on Bumble were willing to consider a man who was 6 feet tall. So 60% would look at a man who's 6 foot tall. The average height, this is American data, I still think it probably applies substantially in Britain. The average height of them in America is 5'8", so 4 inches lower. The number dropped to almost 30% for men 1 inch below the 6 foot threshold. So that's an inch taller than me. Only 30% of women were prepared to look at a man at 5'11", and below 15% for 5'8" and shorter, the average height. So I mean, that's women's height preferences. And I've read that women are really inflexible about this criteria as well. So on the opposite end, it says men of 6'5". That should mean, it actually means 6'6", met the mental height requirement of nearly 90% of women. So women really want a man to be 6'6". That is maladapted. You don't need a 6'6" man to be able to protect you in modern society. That's for simple reasons of infatuation, and probably through reasons of sex, really, sexual excitement. So that I think underlies the supposedly high standards of women. But it's not high standards, it's lovelessness. And this is another index of the same thing. That's how men rate women, nice even distribution curve. So least attractive is 9%, 6%, and most attractive is 6%, just a very even distribution curve. Look at the female. There you are, 27%, 31% least attractive. So more than half are really, really unattractive. I mean, it's totally irrational. It's maladapted. But anyway. And finally, you can look at Tinder dating. I've never been on a dating app. Never want to go. Open out. Well, it looks really unpleasant. Well, I don't know if you can see it. These are the first 4. If I just look for Tinder Insights diagram, and these are the first 4 that came up. I didn't select them. That's you might be able to see there that's a man. Well, I'll see if I can bring up the picture. That shows what that shows is. And let me bring it up. So that fella, he's swiping right on about half of the profiles he looks at. Then when you look at the next couple of the next ones are women, so I'll just go on to those. Hold on. Now this lady, she was on Tinder for almost exactly 4 years, and she swiped nearly 104,000 times, and she swiped right. I expressed interest in 625 men, so about 0.5%, a little bit over 0.5% of the time. And then matches were 500, and then chats 140, and dates 0. So, okay, so it's not working out very well. And then this next lady, during a year, she just swiped only 2,000 times, so very restrained. And she, swiped right 25 times, so that's about 1% of the time. 19 matches, 9 chats, and 2 dates. Okay. The point I'm making is that seeing men either as wallets or deliverers of physical infatuation, that's an exploitative attitude. You couldn't even dignify it with the word transactional because it's so one-sided and self-centered. But the word I would use is loveless. It's transactional, and it's unfair transactional. That does not work. And I think that is bad strategy for women going forward if there is a breakdown, as I think there's likely to be. And what some men are reacting to that in pretty bad ways, and I think it is. The reason I think it's a male reaction is that in general, men, that nice even distribution curve of male attraction towards women, I think that suggests that the problem begins with female attitudes towards men, and men are reacting to it badly, I think, or some men are reacting to it badly by fighting fire with fire. So you get a tendency among men, you see it on Twitter, to mark women out of 10, or she's a 6, she's a 5, she's a 3, etc. Or to call women mid, or oh, she's a mid, always insulting women that way, or focusing on body count or sexual market value, terms like sexual market value. That, I think that is almost like a way to hit back with similarly unfeeling language, or at its real nadir, to give likes and attention to foul individuals like Andrew Tate. But I think that probably isn't the widespread attitude amongst men. I think the widespread attitude amongst men is this. That is here. This is men stepping back. It's not widespread. I'd say that the growing attitude amongst men is a sense of not being able to win, so stepping back from the dating market. So that Pew survey there, if you can see that Pew survey, what they found is that 50% of single men in America, that's America, were uninterested in dating or relationships. So that's romantic relationships or casual relationships, one-night stands. What they also found was that men under 30, 63% are single, and 37% had no interest in romantic relationships or dating. So what seems to be happening is men are you can see that study here if you want to look up the data for Valentine's Day, 5 facts about single Americans from the Pew Research Organisation. That's Pew Research. I think it's considered the gold standard. I think I've heard it described as the gold standard of research. And I think I can understand that male attitude of taking a step back. I think if I was in my 20s, I'd probably take half a step back from the whole dating thing. I certainly would go on dating apps. That would be torture. I wouldn't be such a glutton for punishment as to go on a dating app, but I'd probably take half a step back, and I'd wait until the blood is in the streets and it's a buyer's market, not so that I can exploit people, but so that I can start to deal with a more rational quantity. And I think quite a lot of men are sort of, they don't look at the world the way I do, they're kind of taking that attitude and taking a step back. But I don't think that is indifference. I think that is a response to what I would call a modern female, pervasive modern female lovelessness, which I think a lot of men just find unpleasant and not worth messing with. The phrase, the juice isn't worth the squeeze. I suspect what may be happening is, what I sense might be happening is a slight disgust response by growing amongst some men towards women. And that is dangerous. I do not think that is a good thing. A disgust response can cause a lot of harm. You're more likely to kill people in a group that you are disgusted with than you are in a group that you hate. Disgust it's quite a dangerous emotion, and it's been very common throughout history. I mean, it manifests itself through disgust at the birth canal, the reproductive cycle, or the idea of women's sexual pleasure, and it can be very dangerous, violent and oppressive. That is not a good thing to develop. I hope that doesn't. If you have that in conjunction with state collapse, that could be really bad news. But what I think underlies it is a kind of sense, a sort of generalized sense amongst a lot of women that, amongst a lot of men, that women are not really on their side, that women are kind of loveless and selfishly, unfairly transactional, perhaps a bit hostile. That risks leaving women high and dry if I'm right that their earning capacity is going to be revealed to be a lot lower than we think it is once the state falls over and once the credit boom ends. And the bottom line is, I think that women are likely in those circumstances to need devoted relationships with a provider and providing and protecting male. And for that, I think that requires a loving bond. And I think that might be hard under current circumstances. My purpose is not to castigate women. I appreciate there'll be plenty of comments. So I hope there'll be a few comments saying that I'm trying to castigate women, to give women a hard time there. It's what I'm hoping to do is to point out a problem that I think is arising, that women I suspect are not aware of, and to say prepare for it, and to suggest how women can prepare for it. I've got no illusions about me moving the needle on social habits, but I think it's possible that one or two smart women might say, I don't like him, I don't like what he's saying, but the pile of evidence he's come up with, that stacks up, so I'll file it in the back of my head for later, and I'll look at it later and mull it over. And those one or two women might be able to do something that actually saves themselves. If there is no reason not to do this, or any of the things I've suggested, there is no reason not to do these things. And so if a woman develops the ability to form a close mutually loving bond with a man that is beneficial to a woman, developing that, there is no reason not to develop that ability. The reason I think it will be tough is because after a century of feminist doctrine, and at least half a century of that being increasingly bankrolled and underwritten by the state, financed by the state, I think that's a difficult attitude to change. I come back to what I said earlier about some philosophical or psychospiritual or religious discipline. I don't know how you change that attitude without some kind of religious or spiritual practice or discipline, particularly one that emphasizes compassion on the one hand, compassion or love on the one hand, and realism, seeing reality clearly on the other hand. And I think that's a powerful combination, compassion and realism. I think that is an effective, those are effective habits to develop. And the effect, I think, and that's what I would advocate for women, because developing, if you are loveless, reversing that, you first need to understand why to reverse that. If it doesn't occur to you to want, if you're quite happy being loveless, it's very difficult to see why you should be any different. And so I think you can only inculcate that habit. You need to go fairly deep to reverse that. And that's why I think some kind of religious or psycho-spiritual practice is probably necessary, or benevolent practice is necessary for that. I think the effect is that if you focus on those mental habits of compassion or love and realism, you come to develop those habits in yourself. And when you do that, you then come to value those habits in other people's attitudes towards you. So that you and that then makes it a lot easier to develop those close bonds, loving bonds. And gradually, the bad boy he's 6'3" and he's got a shiny car, maybe a stint in prison a few years ago, and maybe a stint in rehab just to make him exciting, perhaps a slight crackle of violence just to make him seem tough and manly and infatuating. That guy is no longer attractive, because the bad boy, in fact, just appears to be the bad guy, and is just not attractive to you anymore. As you develop those habits, there's more realistic habits of compassion and realism. So again, there is no reason not to do that either. Those are wholesome, healthy habits, even if everything else I'm saying is wrong. So if there's no state collapse, there's no reason not to do this. It's perfectly harmless. It can't drive you mad. It doesn't make you weak. It makes you tougher if you can develop those habits. It makes you a nicer, better person as well. So even if you loathe me, bear my reasoning in mind. Okay, so that's women. Women, you could be vulnerable, and having a good, strong relationship with a man is likely to help you. You need to cultivate the habits that will enable you to do that. Now, finally, another group that I think are very vulnerable are people living in foreigner, invader-dominated areas. Anywhere where whites are a minority, where it looks like they're going to be a minority in the next few years, particularly an area where one particular foreign group it dominates, is the biggest. because if the state falls over and the welfare state falls over and the law recedes, society will separate hard or along ethnic lines. Now, in white areas, what I think we'll see is what we already started to see in Ballymena. I think in England we'll see what happened in Ballymena, but a bit more gently. So the knock on the door, you've got to go now, and if they don't go, a brick through the window, and if they really don't go, setting fire to the car. Enough just to get people out without bloodshed. But I think it'll be different for English people in foreigner-controlled areas. I think there they will get rid of people by spreading terror through killing. That is the method of Islam. That is the way that Hindu areas have dealt with Muslims. I think they'll probably deal with us in a similar way. That's what tends to happen in African countries. So if you are an English person in a foreigner-dominated area, when the state is gone, the economy is broken down, the welfare state is no longer there, you are in danger. So waste no time in looking at what you can do to get out of that area. Start looking now, start hunting. You don't have to move tomorrow, but start preparing yourself. Decide which area you might like to move to. What can you afford there? Where can you live? Take a worse place in an English area, because and you'll be glad that you did. Take a cheaper place, anything to be able to get out. Take a more expensive place. But that's people living in foreigner-controlled areas. I would not want to live in a foreigner-controlled area. All right. So just to wrap up, what I'm saying, if you bear with me, what I'm saying is that my main message is it's not about stacking up gold bars. It's not about living in a castle somewhere remote. It's mainly about mindset. And I would say particularly it's about being aware of what's happening, being able to accept it, and being realistic about the circumstances around you. And also I think it's about preparing your own psychological mindset to be able to develop close relationships with people, close bonds with the people immediately around you, immediate family, being able to prepare to cultivate good relations with your neighbours, and I think being able to fortify your own mindset, which I think a wholesome religion is quite a good way of dealing with some kind of philosophical discipline, is a good tool to accomplish that. I think these things will keep you alive. But the good side is that once the state takes its suffocating, contaminating influence away, things can get up fast. So what I hope is if the rupture that I think is going to come, if it comes, I hope we can all move on to a new system of law fast and get up and get going in prosperity and order and safety fast. Thank you.
Welcome, friends, to another edition of Economic Update, a weekly program devoted to the economic dimensions of our lives and those of our children. I'm your host, Richard Wolff. Today's program is going to be devoted to large U.S. corporations. What they are, why they're there, what their impact is. It's a topic many of you have asked me to address on many occasions. And instead of doing it a little here and a little there, which has been my approach so far, I thought I'd take today's show and offer it as an analysis not only of what mega corporations are and do in our society, but what can be done about it. How can it be challenged and contested and changed? So let's jump right in. Mega corporations, and by that I simply mean the 1, 2, 3 large corporations that dominate so many different industries in the United States, typically use their economic power, strength, and size to buy political and cultural influence and power. They do that by buying mass media, being the great advertisers whose words and ideas you see all the time on the mass media, by donating to political parties and politicians much of the money they need to maintain their activities, hiring and firing and organizing lobbyists to work with the elected officials between elections, and thereby to control political power. We know all of that. You don't need me for that. What I'm doing is responding to their reality. And that reality has recently been brilliantly analyzed over and over again by Ralph Nader, Chris Hedges, and many, many others well known to many of you. So let's begin with a thumbnail critique of the mega corporation in our culture. Most of them, many of them, are monopolists. That is, they are the only big fish in their industry. And in that position, once they've acquired it, they can then jack up the price of whatever it is they sell because they're the monopolist. There's nowhere else to go. You know, the famous example from American history, which I'll come back to, is the telephone. At a certain point, one company called AT&T, American Telephone and Telegraph, was the phone company. And they enjoyed saying to you, if you made a complaint about what they were charging you or the service they got for you, they would giggle at the other end of the telephone line they owned by telling you you can always go to their competition. Ha ha ha, there wasn't any. Now, sometimes monopolists have gotten themselves into trouble by this kind of behavior. You know, today, for example, we have two examples, Walmart and Amazon. Both of them have destroyed thousands of small mom and pop businesses around the country, and even some medium-sized, bigger than mom and pop businesses. They've been a horrific destructive force in countless communities. Okay, that has gotten them a lot of opposition. There have even been communities that have blocked an Amazon warehouse from being located there, or blocked a McDonald's hamburger or a Walmart because they don't like what it means. So often monopolists realize they can defend themselves better if they don't become the only one. Instead, when the competition winnows down the number of producers to 2 or 3 big corporations, they stop. They don't go to the ultimate one left because that will be a target for criticism. They have a stop sign. We'll stay with 3 or 4. By the way, in economics, that's called an oligopoly instead of a monopoly. Monopoly one, oligopoly a few. Best example is the automobile industry, which started in the 1930s with 30, 40, 50 car companies and then winnowed itself down to 2 or 3, Ford, General Motors, Chrysler, and so on. What is typically done by these big corporations is what we call unfair competition. They're big, and they use their bigness, sort of like a bully would, by insisting that suppliers give them a better deal on inputs than the little guys get, or making sure that whoever they sell to privileges their brand over any competitors. It's important to understand that capitalism has always tended to produce monopolies and oligopolies. It's built into the system. And the easiest way to explain it is to tell you and to remind you, because I know most of you know this, that competition, efforts by little and medium-sized businesses to outproduce one another, to offer a better service or a cheaper product or a better product, that always produces winners and losers. Those who do well and their product sells, and those who don't. What you may not understand is that not only are there winners and losers, but the winners absorb. Literally, they eat up the loser. The company that goes out of business has to sell its equipment on the used equipment market. You know who buys it? The winner. The people who lose their jobs in the company that is outcompeted, you know where they look for a job next? in the company that won that competition. So what slowly happens is many producers, through competition, become a few. And if it keeps on going, it becomes the oligopoly or the monopoly. That's why the next time you hear some glib politician or some even glibber businessman or woman tell you about the wonders of competition, you're entitled to sneer. Competition is what causes monopoly and oligopoly. And then there are cases when competition is deliberately removed. Here's an example. You're a big corporation and you buy your inputs in the market, whatever they are. And after a while, you realize you're never quite sure you'll be able to get exactly what you want in the market, at the quantity you want, at the price you want. And so tired of using the market, you buy the company, you absorb it. It's called vertical integration. You literally go out there, and instead of buying the product from the other company, you buy the company. So that production of that input becomes internal to your enterprise rather than external and have to be bought in a market. Once again, when you hear on the 4th of July the joys of our market economy, please remember that large corporations almost always are the result of many decisions made by the company's CEO and board of directors to get rid of the market, to remove the market from their situation by bringing the other companies that they used to buy and sell from to the inside. And you know when they bring them inside, how it's all worked out? By economic planning. The very thing that you denounce as socialism is what every large company does inside, because it's gotten rid of the market outside because it wanted to make more profits and have them be more secure. Okay, so that's the story of the big corporations, how they work, how they got there. Now let's begin to unpack what we can do about it. I have to begin, as I like to do, with some history, because we have, as a people in the United States, and there are similar stories for the rest of the world, we have risen up against big corporations over and over again in our history. I don't have time to go through many of them, but the highlights. At the end of the 19th century and the beginning of the 20th century, there was a mass movement here in the United States against huge corporations. They were called robber barons. That was the name of it. Books and articles were written. Newspaper journalists talked about the horrors of big corporation, the waste that goes on there, the illegality that goes on there, the destructive social effects of big corporations. In 1890, we had the Sherman Antitrust Act. The word trust was often used legally and in the campaigns against them. They were called the big trusts, the robber barons. Notice how different the society was when it called those people robber barons, whereas today they would want to be called, and they pay a lot for the PR, captains of industry. The Clayton Antitrust Act. In other words, Congress passed laws reflecting the mass movement from below to constrain them. The Department of Justice in Washington was equipped with an antitrust division, which it still has, whose job it was, like the title says, to be against trusts, to watch them, to catch them in their illegality, to catch them when they violate the rules of an economic system like ours. It was all capitalism, but big corporations came in for a lot of attention. Same thing happened with that telephone company I mentioned before, AT&T. The government of the United States, under pressure from below, broke the company up. It broke it up into those regional telephone companies that we still have, because the monopoly that AT&T wielded was determined to be socially destructive and socially unacceptable. We created in this country something called the Small Business Administration, which exists to this day. You know why? Because small businesses kept showing that they were being outcompeted and destroyed by illegal, unfair methods. Simple example, big corporation goes to a local bank, says we want a loan and we want it at this interest rate. The local bank says, no, you have to pay more. Oh, says the local bank, really? Then we're going to make sure that nobody banks at your bank. Then we're going to make sure that we go to another bank. We're going to put you right out of business. And the small business can't come and play that game because it doesn't have that many accounts. It's not a fair fight. It's not a level playing field. Big corporations get a bigger, better deal. So we created the Small Business Administration, which deliberately goes out and offers small businesses lower interest rates and all kinds of other supports to keep them alive, because the playing field is in fact tilted and everyone knows it. Well, the big corporations didn't take all this lying down. Who would expect that they would? As long as you allow them to be there, they'll fight back. Okay, what did they do? They spent an enormous amount of money developing public relations. Endless displays that you can see and have to listen to about how the big corporation on the corner is really your good friend and is helping you. These days we hear about how it's all excited about the environment and fighting global war. Oh, sure. It's even called by a name now, greenwashing, to suggest what it's there for. The other thing they did is even more important. They began to realize that if the government was going to have an antitrust division, if state governments and others were going to do something, and I'm going to give you some examples later, well, they could solve that problem by becoming the patrons of. They could capture the regulators. It's called regulatory capture. When the big companies that are supposed to be supervised by the political control of the supervising agency, and that way undercut the whole problem. We've come to the end of the first part of today's show. Please stay with us. We will be right back. Before we move on, I want to remind everyone, Economic Update is produced by Democracy at Work, a small donor-funded nonprofit media organization celebrating 10 years of producing critical system analysis and visions of a more equitable and democratic world through a variety of media. Like the series Ask Prof. Wolf, which is a collection of my responses to questions from Democracy at Work supporters. If you have a question you'd like me to answer, go to patreon.com/democracyatwork or our website, democracyatwork.info, and sign up to support the work we do and submit your question. I try to get to as many as I can, and I thank you for getting involved. You can also learn more about all the work we produce. Sign up for our mailing list, follow us on social media, and join our growing community of supporters who make all of this possible and for whom we are very grateful. So thank you, and please stay with us. We will be right back. Welcome back, friends, to the second half of today's Economic Update. We're talking about mega corporations, the big monster corporations whose initials we've all had to memorize and learn, and who dominate so much of what goes on politically, economically, and culturally. And where we left off in the first half, we were talking about, and I want to continue that, ways in which we as a nation have fought back. And I want you to get the history so you know how possible it is, what its strengths and weaknesses are. We do not have to resign ourselves to being dominated by large corporations. Okay, in addition to the problems of the large corporations, we have seen fightbacks. I mentioned some of them, breaking up AT&T, passing the Clayton and Sherman Acts. Let me give you some more examples. In every one of the 50 states in this country, the states have established commissions. I'm going to give you just two examples. There are more. A utility commission and an insurance commission. What does that mean? Very interesting. Both the utilities and the insurers generated, as they became monopolists or oligopolists, as they became monsters in their industry, they generated pushback. They generated anger at from the companies, large and small, that had to pay exorbitant fees for the utilities they depended on, or the customers, individuals who did, or individuals and businesses who had to pay a fortune to big insurance companies who dominated the market. So in every one of the 50 states, the pressure arose, control these big companies. And here's what the commissions are entitled to do in the 50 states. Before the insurance company or the utility company, by utility company I mean the electric company and all of that, before they can raise a price, they have to go before the commission, demonstrate what they're doing, show their books, and justify the increase they want. And if they're already making a profit, and if the commission doesn't think they need to have a higher price to continue to make a reasonable profit, the commission has the right to say, no, you can't increase your price. In other words, we are controlling and thereby limiting the monopoly power these mega corporations want and like to wield. So, have we succeeded in limiting them? Absolutely. Let me give you some more examples, a couple from other countries. France is an interesting example. In France, small businesses, enraged about the unlevel playing field in competition with big ones, have organized themselves politically. What does that mean? Well, they go to the two parties that usually are fighting in France, a conservative party, basically the mouthpiece of big business, and a socialist party, more likely the mouthpiece of the labor unions and the working class. And the little businesses position themselves in between, and they say something very interesting in French politics. They say to the big guys, you want us to work with you and help your candidates win? You got to give us guarantees against the nasty competition you will otherwise subject us to, the unfair competition. And if you don't give us that, we'll make an alliance with the working class, and we'll screw you by supporting them in getting better deals for workers. That's why the Socialist Party has succeeded over and over again in the last century in French politics, often occupying the presidency, often dominating the National Assembly, and so on. It's an interesting strategy, but it has worked. If you've ever been to France, you'll know that small businesses are the heart of virtually every city. Yeah, big business is there, and yeah, big business has lots of power in France, but it's limited and constrained by this political way small businesses have blocked its advance. Here's another example. In Germany, the working class was enraged by the behavior of these large corporations and forced through in elections by winning enough votes, again led by socialists. There's a law. It's been the law now in Germany for many, many years. Every German corporation with more than 2,000 workers has to give almost half of the seats on the board of directors to individuals elected by the workers. Imagine that. Very hard for Americans to imagine that. But that's in Germany, the most successful economy in Europe. That's what they do to limit the power. Those big corporations can't do all kinds of things because just shy of 50% of the board of directors will vote against them. And they need those workers to vote for other things they want to do, so there's a limit and a control that's being exercised. Okay. Government supervision has not proven to prevent big corporations, nor even to prevent their domination. It's limited it, it's constrained it, it has justified the efforts of people to make those kinds of reforms, but it hasn't solved the problem. And the problem can't be solved unless we deal with what big corporations are. In a democratic society, which we would like to believe we aspire to, and then those of us who are not too critical imagine we've already gotten there. But if you're serious about democracy, then one of the things a democracy ought to decide and put up to a vote is what size enterprise we want. If we don't want mega corporations to have the kind of power that they do in our culture, and they have captured most of the regulatory commissions, and they have dominated the two major parties, that's obvious. They shape the culture through their control of the media, who are themselves monopolists and oligopolists, and therefore hardly voices of criticism. Well, if we want to deal with that, then let's democratize the enterprise in the following sense. We should decide, do we want any mega corporations? Do we want none? Do we want something in between? And let's not be fooled by people who say, well, if you want modern economic wealth, you have to have big corporations. One of my teachers many years ago, John Kenneth Galbraith, made that argument, that we have to accept big corporations because otherwise we wouldn't have the wealth we do. Well, I have two answers to that. Number one, that's a proposition that has never been proved. Big companies always were small companies. And if you ever talk to a big company, honestly, maybe after 2 or 3 martinis, they're used to that, you get the following story. We were much more creative in this company when we were much smaller. Now we're a big, unwieldy bureaucracy. Everything takes very long. We don't grow very fast. Interesting. Let's see how far that goes. Maybe we'd be all better off with an economy that had fewer big monsters. Or maybe we could decide as a society that little companies don't get the kind of supervision that big companies do. We can take the idea of the commission about utilities and insurance and take it more generally. Let's supervise everything that gets beyond a certain size. If you want to be beyond a certain size, you're now subject to constraints and rules and regulations that we don't impose on medium and small to prevent the big ones from abusing the gains of that they get by being large and nothing more than that. And let's make more smaller firms. Let's encourage smaller firms. Let's break up big firms into smaller firms. Especially if we believe in the market competition idea, let's really have it. Or maybe let's be even bolder and imagine that we organize enterprises in our society. Not only that they don't get to an overwhelming size the way we have today, but let's maybe make corporations into worker co-ops. You know we advocate for that. But one of the reasons we do is then they're not governed by profit. They're not governed by a competition that has to make them bigger all the time. If they grow, we can have more companies to serve a growing demand. We don't have to have one company that becomes a behemoth, an enormity that overwhelms us in ways we don't want. We can shape the economy we live in to respond to our democratic needs. What it's doing now is responding to a small number of capitalists who sit at the top of these big corporations. They love the enormous power they wield. They love their ability to give themselves the kind of wealth that the pharaohs had in ancient Egypt, the Elon Musk phenomena and all that goes with it. Yeah, they like it. They promote the PR that's supposed to convince all of us to go along and imagine it should be this way, or it has to be this way, or it is efficient it isn't any of those things. It has been a big burden on the United States, at least as much as anything else. And it has led our citizens like us in the past to fight back with antitrust and commissions and much more. And it's time now, as we see the enormous inequality generated by these companies. The super rich, you know who they are? the ones who sit at the top. That's why you know names like Jeff Bezos or Elon Musk or Bill Gates or the other. It's because they sit at the top of these enormous wealth powerhouses. They're not wealthy because they're smart and well-known and clever. We think they're smart, well-known, and clever because they sit on the wealth. And we allowed that wealth to get to that enormous size. And even if it were true, I don't believe it is, but even if it were, I certainly can be wrong. Even if it were true that we might not generate as much wealth if we had smaller industries, let me ask you a question. Maybe there's a good argument for sacrificing some of the wealth we produce to have a different way of relating to one another in our daily lives, because we are not under the pressure of a few big corporations. The advertising coming at you from every corner, the fact that you have to look at the Coca-Cola young people cavorting on the beach 8 million times in your life, that's not a choice you made. That's their decision of how to get you to buy more Coca-Cola. And that's because they profit from that. Is that really the way we want our society to be shaped in the present and the future, by those who have sit at the top of these monstrosities? I don't think so. I think, in fact, we could learn from the surges of pressure against those kinds of industries in the past, from the efforts they made, noble that they were, and struggle that they took, that they were outrun by these big corporations who used their money to blunt the effectiveness of the movements against them, to capture the very regulators that the reformists set up. Let's learn from that. Laws, regulations, it's not enough. If you don't deal with the very core of the problem, how we allow private capitalists to compete themselves into monopolies and oligopolies, that's the root of the problem. And that's what has to be changed if we're going to solve the problem. It's not a complex idea. It's only perhaps new, and that's partly because those very forces make it very hard to get these ideas out there and across to the people who need to hear them, see them, and act on them. Thank you very much for your attention, and as always, I look forward to speaking with you again next week. Welcome, friends, to another edition of Economic Update, a weekly program devoted to the economic dimensions of our lives and those of our children. I'm your host, Richard Wolff. Today's program is going to look at the interaction between dying empires, particularly the British and the American, on the one hand, and the climate crisis on the other. We're also going to look at a new report from the Secret Service of the United States about mass shootings. We're going to delve into an effort by fast food restaurants in California to buy their way out of paying higher wages. And we're going to then talk about the so-called debt ceiling crisis playing out in Washington. After that, we'll have an interview with a very important independent news journalist and host, Aaron Mate. So let's jump right in. The British Empire started to decline at the beginning of the 20th century and spent the entire century declining. So it's far beyond the United States, whose decline is much more recent in terms of its beginning to go down as a offset, you might say, to its rise in the previous century. But one of the things that we can see already is how the declines of empires play out in terms of how they deal with the crises of their time. We clearly have a crisis of our climate, of our planet, of what we have done to that planet, and what it is doing as a result. And so it's instructive to see what has happened with an empire whose decline is further along than ours, Great Britain, the United Kingdom. So, for example, last month, Minister Graham Stewart, he's the Minister for the Environment in Britain, got exposed taking campaign contributions from fossil fuel companies and supporting renewing coal mining in England and so on. You know, it's pathetic. It happens too often. But at a time when the climate crisis is severe and Britain is already a declining, far along declining empire, it's particularly painful to watch fake concern expressed with the climate while the reality is the opposite. And if that weren't enough, on the 25th of January, the New York Times ran a remarkable editorial talking about the decline of the United Kingdom across the board in its health care, in its living conditions, in its mass attitudes towards issues. It was a remarkable thing for the New York Times to do, and tells you how stark the decline in Britain has gone. Of course, the New York Times, being a U.S. publication, doesn't see the parallel signs of decline here in the United States. So let me offer you one as an example. There have been recent reports that a stunning sum, $1 trillion, was spent in recent years to make a transition from a carbon to a non-carbon energy production system in the world. Out of the $1 trillion that were spent, and that is impressive, over half the amount was spent by the People's Republic of China. Coming a distant second was the United States. And the United Kingdom, nowhere at all. That's what it means when an empire is declining, if you're just willing to look at the accumulating signs. I want to turn next to a recent report by the United States Secret Service, probably best known as being the people who guard the President of the United States. They did a special report on mass shootings. That's right. No longer are mass shootings just a matter for the tabloids and the sensational reporters, but it's also beginning to worry the United States government, as well it should, since we are an outlier when it comes to the sheer number and deadliness of our mass shootings. And I don't have to remind people that recent weeks have been full of them. Here are the two most interesting findings of the U.S. Secret Service report. Number one, 72% of these shooters experienced a major financial stressor. That's what the report calls them. A major financial setback in the previous time just before they began shooting. And 100% had family stressors. That is, deaths, emotional upsets, divorces, and all kinds of family stressors. Those were the two big items jumping out of the report producing mass shootings. I want to stress that in the mass media and in our politicians' empty words about prayer and so on, every one of these shooters is dealt with as an individual, as if something peculiar about him or her life explains what they did. What is never dealt with are the social conditions that produce so many. The pressures on the job, in the home. And those pressures are not intrinsic. That's why no other country has the level of mass shootings we do, not even close. And you know something? The pressures on our families, the pressures on us at work are extreme, and they have become more so. The inflation jacks up the pressure to keep up, which of course we can't. Yeah, you might do something about mass shooters if you stopped blaming the individual for the event and started looking at how the society could be changed. Giving workers higher wages, more time off, a different way of living the work-life balance might be a better way to deal with these mass shootings than the way we've been using, since the increase in them suggests that the way we've been dealing with it is a big fat failure. I turn next to California. California established a commission, and the commission was to look into the conditions of workers in the fast food industry, exactly to look at the conditions which the U.S. Secret Service says are part of why shooters shoot. But now the fast food companies got together and chipped in to fund a referendum about all of this that will at least postpone for another year this commission, whose number one goal was to look into what it would mean to raise the wages of fast food workers in stages to a target of $23 per hour. I want to list the companies that each gave over $1 million to get this referendum passed, to stall off paying fast food workers a decent wage. Here's the ones that contributed $1 million. Chipotle, Starbucks, Chick-fil-A, McDonald's, In-N-Out Burger, and Kentucky Fried Chicken. Yeah. Please keep in mind that when you buy from any of them, a part of the money you turn over is used to persuade you to support a referendum that postpones a decent wage for workers just like you. Your funding. Because believe me, the $1 million that they contribute, they're going to raise their prices to get that $1 million back from the very people they squeeze. I wouldn't be surprised if these companies spend more to block all of these efforts than it would cost them not to do it and just pay the workers what you should have been paying them all along. I come finally to the debt ceiling theatrics. Why do I say theatrics? Well, let me explain briefly. The United States government spends money. You know that. It spends money on the Defense Department. It spends money on Ukraine. It spends money on Social Security checks and a whole host of other things. How does it get that money? Answer. It taxes. It taxes corporations and the rich on the one hand and the mass of people on the other. But often it faces the following weird quality of our political system. Corporations and the rich, like the mass of us, want the government to do things for us. Government helps corporations 100 different ways. Government serves us in 100 different ways. So we get service, they get service. They don't want to pay taxes. We don't either. They're much better at getting out of taxes than we are, so we kind of get stuck with taxes. They have, as I've told you many times, all kinds of ways to minimize, to avoid taxes altogether. What happens if the government can't tax, but the government is demanded to provide services? What do our politicians do when the corporations want services, and the rich want services, and the rest of us want services, but none of us wants to pay taxes? the politicians could stand up and explain that this doesn't work, but they don't. We don't have courageous politicians. We have the other kind. And you know what they've done? They've solved the problem by borrowing. That's right. If you don't tax people, but you don't want to cut back the services they want, if you want to please them by giving services and please them by not taxing, the solution is to borrow the money and to grow it and to borrow more and more. The accumulation of debts of our government means that our United States government today owes, get ready, national debt it's called, $32 trillion. The total output of goods and services in the United States each year now is $22 trillion. Our debt as a nation is more than the total output of goods and services in any year. That's how fat it's become. But here's the worst part, friends. Who do you think the government borrows from?
Fat influencers are dying. Well, that's not a surprise.
Obesity is the leading cause of death in the USA. Obesity is the leading cause of death in the USA.
Yeah.
But that didn't seem to worry these influencers too much, as they made money eating vast quantities of junk food, opened salons to cater to morbidly obese clients, and even dedicated their lives to proving that you can be healthy at every size.
Well, you can say that they dedicated their life. You're right. Now, not that you can be healthy at any size, actually, in fact, that you can't be healthy at any size. But they certainly did something.
Fortunately, though, all of these influencers met the same fate. And we'll start with the youngest influencer.
Oh, I guess it must be they all won the lottery. That must have been the fate.
On our list, who made thousands creating his mukbang content until it cost him the ultimate price. yrTUEXB Culture was a body-positive mukbanger who made his living by eating vast quantities of...
Come on. Come on, bro, like... Jesus, man. Oh, Lord, yeah, wow.
Food online. Despite his aged appearance, obviously due to his massive weight,
what is
he was
like,
just 24
he's 24
years old at the time of these
24.
images. His TikTok page had amassed over...
Jesus, look at that. Oh my God.
Page had at the time of massive weight.
What is
he was
like,
just 24
he's 24
years old at the time of these
24.
images. His TikTok page had amassed over...
Jesus, look at that. Oh my God.
Page had amassed over 188,000 followers, with his content consisting of simply recording himself eating meals. yrTUEXB was from Turkey, which has a bit of a reputation for being one of the most obese countries in the world, as 61% of the population are overweight, with 32%
Why are they fat?
of those being obese. A big factor of this is the food that is traditional in Turkey, with the biggest culprit being the traditional doner kebab, which is meat stacked on top of each other and sliced in rotisserie style. These kebabs are just covered in oil, which stacks up...
I think I need to go to Turkey, guys.
...the calories and makes it incredibly easy to gain weight, which is something that yrTUEXB...
I like that. That sounds really good.
...had no trouble doing. He didn't seem to mind gaining so much weight though, as it was allowing him to live a lifestyle of eating out at high-end restaurants and earning a living without needing a traditional job. This wouldn't last forever though, as his awful eating habit would soon catch up with him.
What happened?
Disastrous consequences. In December 2024, he was hospitalized due to his weight and the related issues that followed along, but was sent home and was allowed to continue getting his healthcare there. On the 31st of January, yrTUEXB uploaded a video of himself getting some sort of treatment and physio. The caption reading...
Like, can't you, I mean, whenever your legs are red like this, like, I mean, don't you at some point think to yourself, if they need to do an EKG or some sort of fucking test to make sure that, like, your legs are working, like, that's a leg? Yeah, I think that's a leg. I mean, you've got it. There's something wrong, right?
needing continuing treatment at full throttle, but as it turns out, this treatment he was receiving wouldn't help too much. In his last TikToks, he was shown just lying in bed as his massive size meant he wasn't able to get up, suffering breathing problems and mobility issues. And just 3 months on from his initial hospitalization on the 7th of March, yrTUEXB lost his life due to presumed heart failure. Now, although yrTUEXB didn't speak too much in his videos, the next influencer to lose their life...
So he just sit there and... I don't understand how people, extreme eater famed for mukbang videos showing himself gorging on food, dies age 24 after weeks in hospital due to his obesity. Oh my god. Jesus, man.
Presumed
who watches
failure.
this?
Now, although yrTUEXB...
So, who watches these videos? Fat people eating food watch videos of fatter people eating food, eating more food, so they can feel better about being fat and feel better about eating their food. That's the reason. Yep.
And didn't speak too much in his videos. The next influencer to lose their life was massively outspoken about her views on fat acceptance.
Oh, no.
Even running a podcast to talk about
She
health.
should have talked to God.
At every
I guess
size.
now she
Dr.
can.
Kat Pause was an American academic and a self-proclaimed fat activist, having degrees in philosophy and sociology, with her dissertation exploring the stigma society holds against fat people. While, yes, there's no denying that society does have a stigma against people who are obese,
Well, because it's disgusting and it's unhealthy. That's the reason why they have a stigma against it. It's the same as there's a stigma against smoking in a lot of places, and also like doing heroin and all kinds of other like being an alcoholic. There's a stigma behind that too. The reason why there's a stigma behind your behavior is because it's disgusting and repulsive, and nobody wants to be around it. I mean, obviously, like, what are we talking about here? Duh. It's the same reason as teeth, right? Like, if your teeth are missing, people are going to say that's disgusting and repulsive. Because it is.
took her beliefs a step further and argued that you can be healthy at every size, including morbidly obese, being a big name in the health at every size movement. Kat found ways to monetize her fatness too, which is her own words, not mine, with one of them being launching the Friends of Marilyn podcast. And she actually ended up traveling the world interviewing other obese people for her show. The key point of her studies and her shows was that fat people aren't being given the same rights as average weight people.
Well, that's true. She doesn't have the right to live a full life because she killed herself by being fat. That's right. They don't have the same rights. You're right. They want more rights. They want to take up more space, consume more resources, and then be treated the same. You're right that they don't want the same rights. They want more rights.
That people are rejected housing and even fired from their jobs for being too large. She
got fired from her job for being fat?
Wrote a study titled I Don't Care About Health, where she claimed...
And she's dead now, right? PhD. Wow.
Claims that she's always had a sneaking suspicion that despite being morbidly obese, there was actually nothing wrong with her body health-wise.
I had a sneaking suspicion there wasn't anything wrong with me. A sneaking suspicion. Well, I mean, that's an interesting name for a doctor.
Same document, she wanted to convince people that being fat doesn't actually make you unhealthy, but provides...
I love how this is a literal death cult. You guys know this, right? It's a literal fucking death cult.
Supporting evidence for this. However, we would soon have some very strong evidence that went against this claim. Like I said in the introduction, obesity is the biggest cause of death in the USA.
Yeah,
the numbers on it are actually staggering too, with almost 3/4 of the American population being obese. Over 17 million adults are classed as it. Honestly,
3/4 of American adults are obese? There's no way.
These numbers should be a wake-up call to change your habits. And I do have a completely free newsletter that I send out every Friday, sharing healthy recipes which are high in protein and low in calories.
I would eat the middle
I know
one
from
without the
personal
green stuff.
experience how difficult it can be to change your eating habits. And I made this with my good friend Johnny with the goal of teaching as many people as we can to cook nutritious meals. The link is in the description to sign up, or just visit Fat Loss Kitchen. And again, this is completely free. Now, Kat Porzay unfortunately did not change her eating habits and carried on her crusade against society for their abuse and discrimination of fat people. This was all up until 2022.
I don't know how more people, like, why is it that this is like jumping in a volcano. Like, if you see somebody jump in a volcano, and there's an idea that you'll be reborn as like a phoenix or something, but there's just more people that are jumping in a volcano, nobody's coming out as a bird, wouldn't at some point people realize, like, hey, maybe this is a bad idea, we shouldn't do this anymore? Like, I mean, really, like, you see people that are doing this all the time, and they're killing themselves constantly. Wouldn't you think to yourself, maybe this is a bad call?
Age of just 42 years old and living in New Zealand, she passed away in her sleep. She was working as a fat studies academic at a university in New Zealand at the time, and no cause of death was officially given. This would be the same.
Pause his work, focus on the well-being of overweight people and the effects of spoiled identities. Man, how could something like this happen?
Same as the next influencer to tragically lose their life. However, his content was less academic and more about food. Waffler69, or Taylor Lejeune, was a 33-year-old food TikToker who posted videos of him eating huge and strange meals.
Jesus.
His excitable personality. Considering he amassed over 1.9 million followers and each of his videos gained millions of views,
7 million?
To say he was making more than enough money to support his eating habit. And he needed it. If you take a scroll down his TikTok page, you can see that he must have been spending hundreds, if not thousands of dollars a month on huge meals and strange food items.
Today we're trying cookie liquor. I've got 3 McDonald's breakfast sandwiches. Which one's the best? I've got Lay's Waves Funyun Onion flavored rings. I've got 3 new pickled snacks. Let's see what they are. Loaded baked potato pickles, spicy garlic, and hot peppers. I got Silverwood pizza from the new season of Stranger Things. Let's see, what is this frozen pizza like?
Oh my god.
Although his meals aren't as extreme as Epichan's, and he didn't share his fat positivity views like Pat did, that doesn't mean his health was any better. And you can see that Taylor was massively overweight, and his diet seemed to be
honestly, you know what's crazy is that this guy looks skinny compared to the other two of them. Like, you have one guy that's like, bro, this guy isn't laying in bed, he is the bed. And then the next one is like, I mean, I don't know, I think she have to go sideways through a door. And like, this guy is just like, you know, he's a bit of a pork boy, but like, not really, not like the other ones. Oh my god.
In a video uploaded on the 3rd of February, he actually shared the screen with his brother, and commenters loved him, even calling them an iconic duo. However, the next time we would see Taylor's brother would be under very different and heartbreaking circumstances.
Hey guys, if anyone's being shared this video from another, or if you just don't know, I'm related to Waffler69, or my brother Taylor. He has passed away around 10 p.m. on January 11th, 2023. From a presumed heart attack. Was rushed to the hospital, and I want to say like an hour and a half later, he passed away.
The most shocking part is that Taylor's brother revealed that their father and grandfather died from heart failure, and Taylor died of a suspected heart attack. For the most part, Taylor was pretty uncontroversial and didn't make a big fuss about his weight or talk about it much, which is the exact opposite to Brittany Sauer.
Yeah, I mean, for that, I mean, I really can't, I can't really fault the guy or hate the guy that much. I'll be real. It's just kind of sad, but yeah, it sounds like a genetic heart thing. Well, it's probably this. It's probably a genetic heart thing that was made worse by, you know, making a career out of eating unhealthy food. So it's like, you know, you're multiplying two negatives against each other, and that's not good.
His entire personality was based around her weight. Brittany Sauer was another professional TikToker who was 28 years old and lived in Springfield, Tennessee. Her hobbies included mainly gaming, but her biggest hobby...
Jesus Christ.
Bobby was creating videos on TikTok eating and showing off her body and supposed weight loss journey. Her TikTok account was called Sick and Tired of Waiting, and she boasted a following of almost...
Sick and tired of waiting. Oh, what are you gonna do? Oh, what are you gonna do, boys?
Half a million. But the main interesting part was her account description, which read regaining my mobility and life, BED recovery and type 2 diabetes. Yep. Now, although she did like to make jokes about being fat, it's the second part of her bio that we should focus on. As she said herself that she was in recovery for a binge eating addiction, and genuinely did seem like she was trying to make steps to change. That's good. Sharing her weight loss journey very openly.
Oh my god, I am 21.6 pounds down now.
Wow.
I'm excited. That brings me to 433.6 down from 455.2. And I'm so excited.
I will say that the rate that she lost weight, however, was incredibly slow, as she lost those 20 pounds that she talked about over around 150 days. So it's clear that despite her efforts to eat in a calorie deficit and exercise, it objectively...
Press X to doubt. Like, nah, bro, like, there's no way. There's no way. If you're that big and you only lose 20 pounds, there's no way.
It wasn't working. Yeah. It seems like Brittany herself knew this too, as at the end of 2022 she posted this TikTok, seeming to finally open her eyes as to just how serious her situation was becoming.
I ruined my life with food, binge eating, and lack of self-care, and I'm hoping that it's not too late for me this time. You know, I ain't been to the store in 2 years, maybe more now, I guess.
Why?
I went to the post office once and that was hard. I went to urgent care.
I don't understand how a person, like, whenever you get to the point that you can't walk around because you're so fat that you can't even move your own body, don't you have to at a certain point think to yourself, maybe I'm doing something wrong? I feel like it is, like, you've really got to think, like, geez, maybe I'm fucking up here. Yeah, therefore some obese people do not have a choice and can't put everyone in one basket. I knew a 15-year-old boy who had a genetic condition, died last year. He ran marathons, did cycling, and with his athlete father. Yeah, there are people with genetic conditions, but most of these people's genetic condition is called Golden Corral. And so that's, I'm not going to hear about, oh yeah, well what about the 3% of them that are actually, victims of like some disorder? And even 3% is outrageous. It's probably way